Anthony Albanese failed to get a meeting with President Donald Trump yet again, and I can't help but reiterate my past points from previous videos that I don't think he's going to get a meeting with President Trump while he keeps Kevin Rudd as our ambassador to the United States of America. And frankly, I don't think he should get a meeting with President Trump for as long as Rudd stays where he is. For those that may have missed it, Kevin Rudd is our ambassador to the United States of America. But for a diplomat, he has said some very undiplomatic things about President Donald Trump over the years, including saying things like, he's nuts, he's the most destructive president in history, calling him a village idiot, a traitor to the West, a political liability, and Rudd has also gone on the record supporting the historical narrative that the January 6th protests were some sort of Trump-supported attempt to overthrow the US government. Now, I'm all in favour of freedom of speech. Rudd can call Trump names if he likes, and I'm happy to return the favour and say that Kevin Rudd is one of the nastiest, most graceless, sociopathic assholes that ever got power in this country, beaten only by Daniel Andrews in that regard. But the difference between what Rudd has said about Trump and what I've now said about Rudd is that I'm not being given a highly paid, taxpayer-funded, very desirable diplomatic position that involves representing 27 million people to the very person that I have criticised so harshly. Rudd, on the other hand, has been kept on as the US ambassador for Australia despite all that he has said about the current President of the United States, and despite the fact that he is quite clearly incapable of being, well, diplomatic. But actually, this is less about Rudd, because, after all, he can't unsay the dumb things he's already said, and quite frankly, anyone would accept such a plum job if it was offered to them, so it's really not his fault. It's more about Anthony Albanese, because he absolutely could swap out Rudd for someone else, someone who hasn't intentionally stirred up bad blood between themselves and the person they're supposed to represent us to. And yet Albo chooses not to replace Kevin Rudd. This is, in my opinion, a perfect example of a politician choosing internal political expedience over doing what's best for the country. Poking Trump in the eye by keeping Rudd as the ambassador might carry favour with the Marxists inside his own party. But it is hurting Australia, and at some point we have to wonder, at what point does Albanese's decision to keep Rudd on in that role become an act of malicious sabotage against our own country? At what point does it become undeniable that Anthony Albanese is deliberately working against our national interests for his own personal or political gain? Or to say it another way, at what point does Albanese's intentional mishandling of our relationship with our most important security ally make him a traitor? My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I make no-nonsense content like this, talking about Australia and the issues that affect us. If you like what I do, please help me to keep doing it even more by buying me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net. And if you like my videos, then you will love my no-nonsense books about government, power and civil disobedience, which you can find at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Now, Anthony Albanese nearly got a meeting with President Trump at the G7 summit in Canada in June, but Trump ended up leaving early due to the escalation in the conflict in the Middle East. You can probably chalk that one up to bad luck. And to be fair, there have been 4 phone calls between Albanese and Trump, at least some of which have been described as warm. But it also has to be said that Albanese seems to keep coming off looking like a fool after each of those phone calls. Remember when he called Trump to discuss tariffs back in February? With the ABC triumphantly reporting that Trump was going to consider tariff exemptions for Australian steel and aluminium, only for those tariffs to be imposed hours later regardless. Albanese had the hide to describe Trump's decision to impose those tariffs as not the act of a friend. But my question for Albanese is, do you think Trump views Rudd as a friend? And does he view your decision to keep Rudd as the ambassador to the US as a friendly decision? The entire purpose of a diplomat is to open doors and to make relationships warmer. Rudd's presence in the US is a direct affront to Trump. It's a contradiction to the very purpose of having a diplomat in the US in the first place. Excuse me. Now, Albanese's had 3 more phone calls with President Trump since those tariffs were imposed. But if you were hoping that things would have gotten better by now, well, it seems like his phone calls are having the opposite effect. The tariffs are still in place, and in fact, the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium have been increased up to 50%. And yet somehow, it seems as though Albanese simply hasn't gotten the hint. Well, he's just been given another hint, this time courtesy of the upcoming UN General Assembly meeting in New York. It was widely anticipated that Anthony Albanese would be one of the world leaders getting a meeting with Trump, probably a bilateral meeting, meaning it would just be the two of them, Trump and Albanese, so that they could discuss things like trade, tariffs, defense, the AUKUS deal, and more. Well, the announcement of who Trump is meeting with has been made, and well, just listen.
The president will also be hosting bilateral meetings with the UN Secretary General and the leaders of Ukraine, Argentina, and the European Union. The president will also later in the day hold a multilateral meeting with Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, the UAE, and Jordan.
Yeah, that's got a sting. Albanese could get a meeting with President Trump in a heartbeat. All he would have to do is repost Kevin Rudd somewhere else, maybe China, and install someone that Trump actually likes as our ambassador to the United States. Bring back Alexander Downer, or maybe ask Anthony Pratt, very nicely, if he would be willing to do it. I mean, Anthony Pratt donated to Trump's campaign, and I think the two of them would get along just fine. Or even just pick an inanimate object, for crying out loud. A brick would have a better chance of getting in the room with Donald Trump than what Ambassador Kevin Rudd has. Leaving Rudd as the ambassador to the US is an insult to Trump. And we all know that. It's a deliberate poke in the eye, and Trump's not an idiot. He knows how these games are played. And the thing is, whilst this state of affairs might be helping Anthony Albanese's popularity within his caucus, his faction within the Labour Party, it is costing the rest of us dearly. And that raises an interesting question in my mind. See, the director of a company has a fiduciary duty towards that company and the shareholders under the Corporations Act 2001. In Section 181, a director is required to act in good faith in the best interests of the company. In Section 180, they have to act with due care and diligence. Failing to do so exposes company directors to civil penalties, including fines of over $1 million. Potentially also bans from being a director in future, paying compensation for costs that they've caused, and more. But also, and this is the important bit, if their failure is deemed to have been intentional, then the charges can become criminal. Intentionally failing to exercise due care and acting in the best interest of a company can result in criminal prosecutions in Australia. Because if you accept that responsibility and the paycheck that comes with that responsibility, then you have an obligation to do what's best for the company and not to do things that are obviously going to be damaging to the company. Imagine a company director deliberately sabotaging their corporate relationship with their biggest client or their biggest supplier just because it was good for their popularity at home. The wife really likes it when I do that sort of thing. A company director could go to prison if that's what they did. But what about politicians? What if it's true that Anthony Albanese is deliberately keeping Kevin Rudd as the ambassador to the United States of America, despite knowing that it is damaging our national relationship with our most important security partner? And what if he's doing it because it makes him more popular at home, inside his factional base, or for any other reason besides this is what's best for Australia? At what point does this become an intentional failure in his duty of care? At what point does this become treason? Criminal? We'd have to be close to that point. There is no rational reason to keep Rudd in that position. There is simply no upside to having him there. He is an undiplomatic asshole to begin with, and he is completely unsuited to any diplomatic role at all, in my opinion, but he is objectively unsuited to a diplomatic role in the United States of America while Donald Trump is their president. That's not opinion, that's objectively true. Albo can't get a meeting with Trump, but the leaders of Turkey, Indonesia, Ukraine, Pakistan, and a whole bunch more can. And I think it's pretty obvious why. The thing is, he's doing it to himself, on purpose, which means that he's doing it to us, on purpose. The man who is supposed, obliged to act in our best interests is intentionally working against them. Now, as best as I can tell from my research, there is no explicit law that requires Rudd to do what's in the best interest of Australians, and in a sense that's as it should be, because it's supposed to be up to us as Australians and how we vote through the ballot box to determine who is and is not doing what's best for us. And it would be quite dangerous to put some other authority in charge of such a decision, like having judges or other bureaucrats dismiss politicians. That's too risky. But what Albo is doing, in my opinion, is at a minimum negligent. And I personally think it is at least reckless, bordering on intentional, vindictive harm to Australia. And I believe we need to put the pressure on to get Kevin Rudd removed ASAP. Because then, and in my opinion only then, will Australia get a seat at the table with Trump. And then and only then will Albo get the meeting with Trump that he seems to want and yet is also sabotaging. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy Australians like you to keep up with the world as it changes around us. I am 100% viewer supported, so if you appreciate what I do, then please help me to keep doing it by buying me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net. And if you like my videos, then you'll love my books, which you'll find at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, along with my DVDs, t-shirts, and hoodies. Thank you for watching to the end. The algorithm loves you, and so do I. Please like, comment, subscribe, and as always, think free.